Growing up, I was the adventurous type. I used to grab a backpack, pick up my favorite stick, and set off into the woods just outside my childhood home. I remember the feeling of how vast the woods felt, how impossibly tall the trees were, how every time I stepped into the woods, I was stepping off into another adventure, letting my imagination take me wherever it wanted. Maybe today I would find a new base, a new point of interest. A felled tree is now making a bridge for me to cross the creek into uncharted territory, all leading to confronting a new imaginary foe, a dragon to slay. The magic of our childhood imagination is something that is impossible to bottle. I've only ever felt something similar playing games like The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, an immortal game to me because of how well it delivered on that sense of wonder, walking into an unexplored world, no direction, just an adventure that developed on its own. RPGs in my mind are meant to feel like a journey, as if I've started on a second life and I'm going to live in this world until I've completed my quest. Ocarina of Time was a journey. While many games have come close to it over the years, I don't think it's possible to recreate the sense of wonder or vastness that I felt exploring Hyrule for the first time. I've explored every single area in the game, looking for every single secret that I could find, spoke with every NPC to hear their story, and I felt as though that experience was just for me and me alone. Every interaction with the world and its characters left an indelible mark on me. It's one of the very few games that I feel like I could hand draw a map of and know where everything is in the game. That's the mark of a special game. A game that makes it feel as though it was made specifically for you. A game you remember. An experience that you carry for a lifetime. Baldur's Gate 3 is what I consider to be my second Ocarina of Time. I've been on a journey with Baldur's Gate 3 for over 3 years now. I've been a part of the early access, and I feel like I have a hand in the creation of the game. But beyond that, it's been a game that I've anticipated for a really long time. Look, I'm a casual gamer. I work a 40-hour job. I come home, I play a couple hours of games, and then I have to go to sleep. I am not the kid that I used to be that could completely lose themselves in a game, has no distractions. However, this game seems to do the impossible. To make everything disappear. To make it where the only thing that I'm paying attention to is the game that I'm playing in the moment that I'm playing it. And nothing else seems to matter. That's an incredible feeling. And it's something that's incredibly valuable. This is a heartfelt, casual gamer's review of Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 is one of the most stunning games that I've ever played. While it's not the most graphically intensive, it's incredibly dense with character. The wilderness of Act 1, the temple vista in the mountain pass, the neon colors of the Underdark, the despair and gloom of Act 2, and the busy streets of Baldur's Gate. While it's easy to get swept up in the grandeur of Baldur's Gate 3's map design and its character design, I think the most engaging part of the game's visuals is how it feels like there's something hidden around every single corner of the game. The game is always giving you these visual hints that are being displayed, leading you towards a secret. While the game provides map markers for quests, I've never felt like I've ever had to use them because I just naturally find my way through to every single quest in the game. The game moves the player, which I find a much more valuable and memorable experience than being directed. While I do love the world design, it doesn't take away from how impressively characters are designed. The detailed hair, the individual complexions, their eye movements, facial expressions, and body language. Their careful design not only shows a high attention to detail, but also the love and commitment that was poured into making these characters feel alive. And as a result, I find myself completely immersed anytime I'm in conversation with them. I genuinely cannot take my eyes off of this game. Most times when I'm playing PC games, I have something going on my second monitor. Whether that's watching a stream or a YouTube video or having a conversation in Discord, there's always a distraction, but when it comes to Baldur's Gate, I'm always fully engaged. There's nothing else going on unless I'm actually streaming, and that's a completely different story. And one of the reasons why I'm so engaged is because this is probably the most realistic experience I've had talking with characters in a game. The most realistic depictions of having an actual conversation with somebody in a video game, or at least the closest I've been to it. And I didn't realize how important that was until I played something like Starfield, where the characters and the companions are animated in a very bland way. And this isn't something that's a strike necessarily against Starfield, but it just shows how much more value can be brought out of characters and companions specifically when you animate them in a very specific way that makes it where they feel real. You can tell Shadowheart is hiding something. You can see how much Karlach wants to live. That adds an incredible amount of value to the player's experience, to my experience specifically. Beyond that, there are beautiful areas in this game that tell stories on their own, whether that's areas in Act 2 where you can see that there's broken down ballistas or machines of war. You can tell that this is a battle-ridden area. Something went down here. You can see things like that even across Act 1 as well. That adds, again, even more value to the experience because it's not just these blank areas that we're transported to walking long distances where there's nothing going on. No, that density of character that's in this game, leading you from place to place, there's always something there. There's always something to look at, something to discover, someone to talk to, a story being told. So many games have these bleak worlds where you have minutes upon minutes of walking through blank territory with nothing going on, nothing to look at, nothing to interact with. That doesn't exist here. And because of that, I'm always engaged. And that's so refreshing. I'm not sure if it's my newly discovered love for the mechanics of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, or it's maybe just the high of enjoying the addiction to classic role-playing games. However, Baldur's Gate 3 just feels good to play. While I definitely have some gripes with the UI, especially inventory management, man, healers and spellcasters can be a major headache with the ungodly amount of prepared spells that they get, many of them being incredibly situational, so it can feel relatively clunky at times. However, Dungeons & Dragons, just like Baldur's Gate 3, are very situational games. Every combat encounter has multiple solutions, whether that's applying specific buffs or debuffs to overcome enemy strengths, using the environment against your enemies, or coming up with your own unique destructive ways to swiftly bring combat to an end. While many people may look at turn-based systems as a hindrance for Baldur's Gate 3, something that slows down gameplay, I look at it like an opportunity to think, craft a strategy, and see how your plan plays out. I get the time to take a breath, enjoy the game at a slower pace, and not be overwhelmed by the fast-paced mechanics, gameplay, and bright lights that we see in action RPGs. In contrast to the swirl of blades and spells that we see in action RPGs, we get to scout ahead, find the engagement, and start coming up with a plan of attack, and for me, that's been half the fun. Conversely, sometimes we'll find encounters that are going to catch us off guard, combat that just seems to pop out of nowhere, or maybe we just made a bad dice roll, and now we're forced to make quick decisions to find the upper hand. That part is really engaging, and it just feels good. Even after playing multiple playthroughs of engaging the same encounters over and over and over again, I've never felt like they've lost their luster. I always try something new, always try to find a new way to put the enemy at a disadvantage, and especially when you're going from normal to tactician, encounters just never feel the same. While I definitely wish there were more difficulty levels, tactician is relatively easy once you've got your classes online. However, similarly to Divinity Original Sin 2, we'll probably see some random encounter mods and some higher difficulties soon enough. I want to take a moment to talk about character progression and customization. I love Dungeons & Dragons rule set when it comes to character progression and itemization, especially in a video game. The fact that it focuses on the transformative nature of the classes and their design rather than items allows items to actually play a much bigger role than they do in many popular RPGs. You feel far more agency in your choices that you make when you're building a character and choosing their background, attributes, feats, and spells. And at some point, when you find a weapon or a piece of equipment that does something as simple as Misty Step, it completely changes your strategy for encounters and the way that you even explore with your party. You feel the power of every single level that's gained, and it's in stark contrast to a variety of the action RPGs I've played where you really don't feel any of the power from the levels that you get, especially in the early and mid stages of the game. In Baldur's Gate 3, by the time you reach the end of a specific act, you feel like you are the god of that act. all before the crashing reality of stepping into the next act, crushing your confidence, and forcing you back to playing a more strategic way rather than just rushing headlong into combat. So I feel like Baldur's Gate 3's combat is actually relatively fast-paced, and the reason I feel that way is because of how creative we can get with our characters within a single turn. Whether that's throwing a potion at a character to heal them, or interacting with an object that maybe activates a trap that hurts a bunch of enemies, shooting a lever that drops a hammer. All kinds of different ways that we can interact with our environment, the enemies, and even NPCs. There's all kinds of different ways that we can creatively bring combat to an end, and I feel like when we have all of these different options at our disposal, we're looking at what weaknesses different characters have, seeing what kind of spells they might use or what characters they might go to attack, thinking about what spells we have available to us, when and where is the best time to use them. When our mind is that activated and we're that engaged with the game, the combat doesn't feel slow. That's why the game feels so good to me. Now, I do think that there's plenty of things that Baldur's Gate 3 does wrong with its mechanics, specifically just things that I feel like they underutilize. When I'm looking at something like camp supplies, camping and resting in general, short rests, I have never felt like I couldn't find camp supplies. I'm finding food all over the place. And while it might be a little bit difficult at the very beginning of the game, when you're playing Tactician and you're in Act 2 or Act 3, I feel like it's a complete non-issue. It's not a problem for me because I have tons of gold. I can just go to all the different vendors that I've seen across the entire game, buy packs, and I'm back on the road. I feel like this is one of the reasons why there needs to be another difficulty, something that's going to ramp it up a little bit higher, make supplies a little bit more difficult to find, make potions and things like that more difficult to find so that we actually use the crafting in the game. I feel like crafting is something that's also underutilized. While I like it being an option, and I feel like that's the route that they kind of tried to go with this, they didn't want to make things necessary for you to have to understand or necessary for you to interact with because they felt like it detracted from the overall experience. I think not making that stuff necessary in Tactician takes away from the experience of wanting to play a more difficult playthrough. I want to try to ration things, and I don't want to just put that upon myself arbitrarily. I don't think that's the word for it. Not in a real way. I don't want to put it on myself in a real way. I can't think of the word right now. I'm sorry. You're just gonna have to live with that. But I want to be restricted. I want to have to think about how I'm going to ration my skills and abilities, my heals, my potions. I want to be put in a position in which I do need to think about using things like oils and elixirs and things of that nature. And I feel like the game really doesn't push you to need to use any of those kind of things. So I would like to see something like that in the future. Now, I realize we're going to have mods that are going to make the game much more difficult and probably a lot more engaging than it already is, which is crazy to even think about. But these are things that I would like to see them work on in the future. Baldur's Gate 3 just feels good to play. Not mechanically like I stated before, but atmospherically. Even as I'm writing this review right now, I'm listening to the ambient music that's played in camp. Just as the music in Baldur's Gate 3 captures my attention, it is now gracefully motivating my writing. We often tend to say X or Y game has great music, but we never really talk about how that makes us feel or how it enhances our gameplay experience. Camp music gives me a genuine feeling of reprieve. It's subconsciously motivating me to take a break, walk away from the game, and disconnect for a little while. Overworld music, on the other hand, actually moves me throughout the world, whether that's the brazen adventure that I feel through the woods of Act 1 or my cautious steps that I'm taking across Act 2. Combat music both focuses and inspires my strategy. As weird as it may sound, I feel like I'm executing attacks and abilities to the rhythm of the music. I feel the world through the music in this game, and it's something that I really appreciate. We often discuss sound design in more realistic manners, seeing how guns shoot in different hallways or outside or next to certain things, or whether or not certain sounds sound real or not, things like that. But we never really talk about how sound and music specifically contributes to our gameplay. When I'm looking at a game like Baldur's Gate 3, there's sometimes sounds that are actually drawing you towards quest objectives. Maybe that's a conversation that you're hearing off in the distance, or a frog that's creaking in the bog. I think that's probably the best way for me to say that. I brought it up in another video as well. There's these different audio cues of the game actually drawing you in different directions to make sure you know that there's something interesting there. That's such a powerful tool, and it's so nice to not have to be directed by a big glowing quest marker that's telling me that there's something that I need to go talk to, or somebody that I need to go talk to, or something that I need to interact with. Not to mention, this game's music is probably the best score that I've heard since playing Final Fantasy games, like Final Fantasy XIV or Final Fantasy XVI earlier this year. It's so obvious how much Larian cares about this game when you listen to the different music scores across the entire game. Whether that's adventuring around in Act 2, whether that's listening to Alfira play in the Grove, whatever. You can just tell that the emotion is there. They're trying to elicit a specific emotion from us, whether that's firing us up in combat, whether that's firing us up in the very opening screen before we even start our game, whether that's calming us down in camp. They're very specifically trying to elicit very specific emotions from the player, which not only engages us further and enhances our overall experience, but just gives us something to sit back and appreciate. And I love it. I really do. The sound design in this game is, bar none, one of the best that I've seen this year, if not this entire generation. But beyond that, this is some of the best music that I've heard in video games in a long, long time. Baldur's Gate 3 is, bar none, the best companion and character role-playing game that I have ever played. The character art, the animations, their writing, and their voice acting is peerless. While I think there are a ton of games that do something similar with NPCs or companions, none of them do it as holistically or as thoughtfully as Larian has done with Baldur's Gate 3. You can feel the genuine care for the characters. It's almost as if they wrote them as true companions of their own, real friends, and not just these character archetypes that we normally see. Now, I'm not saying that some of these characters don't fall into familiar tropes. However, within a few conversations, many of your preconceived notions of those characters are completely obliterated as these characters continue to evolve throughout the entire story in sometimes really drastic ways. Due to the genius of the character writing and their portrayal, I found myself not only interested in the main story, but heavily interested in every single character's arc. In most RPGs, your character's story is the one that takes precedence. You are spotlighted. You are the hero. However, in Baldur's Gate 3, you're just one of the party members. It's a collective story, a collective adventure, with each character holding similar weight, impact, and importance to the overall story of the game. And it's all tied together with some of the greatest voice performances I've ever heard in gaming. And I think that's incredible. I am not the main character. We are the main character. Everybody in the party plays their role. You're sharing in triumphs, you're sharing in defeats, and you're also judged for some of the actions that you take. In most games, that's just not really done the same way. Characters aren't ever portrayed in this way. Parties aren't portrayed in this way. You are always spotlighted as the main hero, the main character. Everything's about you, but in this game, it's about us. There's something so cool about that, so dynamic about that, that adds so many different layers to not only interaction and engagement, but obviously the permutations and things like that they put into the game. And that's one of the reasons why everybody's story, everybody's experience is so vastly different from someone else's. There's characters that I have in my party that my friends have never put in theirs. There's characters that I've met in NPCs that I've formed relationships or bonds with out in the world that have died in other playthroughs with my friends. And I'm not even talking about Dark Urge. There's something so cool and so unique to everybody having their own story, and you being part of this collective story rather than just all of the attention being on you. While you are the one that makes the final decision, in a lot of cases, you can make those decisions using other characters in the party. I have a playthrough where I'm playing a monk. They're an absolute dial tone. For the most part, the main character isn't even the main character. I'm using Shadowheart as a bard because she actually has skills to talk to people, unlike my monk that just can stare at them and fail rolls every 5 seconds. I think this is something that gains even more depth when we start looking at character quests and things like that, and how well they do this interweaving of not only character quests, but also quests throughout the entire world. Every quest feels like it has an impact on the main story. Nothing actually feels like a side quest in this game. And there's something that's so cool about that. Well, I do enjoy that in very, I don't know, more like sandbox RPGs where I can just go off in a random direction and have a random adventure. There's something really cool about making everything feels like it intertwines with the overarching narrative. It's something that just makes the entire experience that much more engaging. It makes everybody's experience that much more unique. I really love this game. In the off chance that you found this video before purchasing Baldur's Gate 3, buy this game. It's worth a shot even if it's something that you normally wouldn't play. This is your adventure to have. They've thought of so many different options, so many different permutations, making sure to keep in mind that you might just kill off every single person that you meet. Whether it's the art, architecture, music, characters, spells, builds, progression, loot, narrative, or just wanting to go out and slay some monsters, Baldur's Gate 3 offers a lot to anyone that wants to give it a shot. And it's a game that I will always wholeheartedly recommend. So if you made it to this video and you're upset because I just spent my entire time gushing over Baldur's Gate 3, I will admit that it's difficult to be objective because the game is incredibly special to me. It's a game that I genuinely love to play, and it's made by a developer that I wholeheartedly respect and can't wait to see the next thing that they make. I'm not going to deny that Baldur's Gate 3 has its issues, just as any game always does. But the difference here is that Baldur's Gate 3 actually offers more value than it offers issues. And that's what we tend to judge things on. It's difficult to be able to weigh whether or not games need to be able to come out complete, or we just need to have good games. I recognize that there's some issues that are always going to be persistent, but when it comes to companies that we know, or at least that I know, that I can trust, Larian Studios is one of those companies. It's easy to tell looking at the game just how much they love it. It's easy to tell how much they love and enjoy interacting with their community. They want this game to be the best RPG experience Larian Studios can possibly deliver. And it's a game that not only by its release set a new standard for RPGs, but it's also a game that's set a new standard for myself. Inspired me to want to put more effort into the things that I do, into the things that I enjoy. It makes me want to bring more value to other people through the content that I make here on YouTube. It's a game that's always going to be special to me, and it's a game that I honestly just can't wait to play more of. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you for sticking around this long. I hope you guys have a great day. Stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe, guys. And as always, I will see you in Baldur's Gate. Peace.